concerns all of us. And right now, I think there was a time when sex was our national obsession. I think food is our national obsession right now. Any of you who look at the New York Times, today we have an announcement that there's a new book out called The Hungry Ear, Poems of Food and Drink, a collection of poems about food. Food is on the news all the time, and I'm sure that all of you have seen many of things about childhood obesity, about agriculture, and about other topics related to school. The other one today is that chickens, how many of you live in Brooklyn? Anyone here? Okay, chickens are threatening to divide your community. The month-old dispute that has turned neighbor against neighbor in Brooklyn has spawned petitions, door-to-door campaigns, and reams of flyers. There have been shouting matches, and even an intervention from a city councilman. And it all started with 8 clucking hens. Some of you may not realize that it is legal to keep chickens in the city. And apparently these chickens are a matter of some controversy. They happen to be in your neighborhood, Professor Grasso, near Park Slope, creating controversy between people. So it's in the news all the time. All you have to do is pick up a paper. We all most often think of agriculture in terms of food production, but in fact it spans a number of areas, and it's easier to remember these mnemonically. It's the 3 F's: food, fiber, and more recently fuel, as corn has begun to be used as a fuel source, and biofuels. My presentation is going to examine a movement called Agriculture in the Classroom. And this movement was founded in the early 1980s to promote agricultural literacy in pre-K through 12 education. So I'm first going to provide some background on this initiative, and then I am going to examine some of the reasons that I believe this initiative came about in the early 1980s. And finally, I want to look at some of the messages that are coming out of Agriculture in the Classroom movement, because they are more than just educational, they're also political. And it's fortuitous that you chose October, Dr. Henke, for my presentation, because October is Farm to School Month. Many of you may know that since 1996, there's been a large movement to get school cafeterias to connect with local producers and get fresh food in their cafeterias from the local producers, rather than buying all canned foods and suppliers and the rest. So this is a good time and an apt time to talk about agricultural education. Now, Agriculture in the Classroom, which is abbreviated as AITC, began in the 1980s. It was established by the USDA for a specific purpose, to promote what they called agricultural literacy. What is agricultural literacy? We hear a lot about literacies, quantitative literacy, critical reading literacies, but this particular movement was specifically designed to create agricultural literacy, awareness, knowledge, and appreciation of agriculture. Right now, it's run by state-run programs. You can see our New York Agriculture in the Classroom logo here with a barn and a pencil joined together, representing farm organizations, agribusiness, education, and government. And the national AITC, it's from the USDA, it supports these state organizations. So each state kind of runs independently, but the national AITC helps state develop programs. It encourages USD agencies to assist the state in these educational programs. And it acts as a central clearinghouse for educational materials and information about agriculture. That's how I learned of it, because I was on a listserv and noticed, I've been interested in agriculture for a long time, and noticed a call for papers for the National Agriculture in the Classroom Conference. And I was very curious about this because I started my career at North Carolina State University, which is one of the nation's land-grant universities. And some of you may or may not be familiar with what the land-grant universities are. But they were founded specifically to provide engineering and agricultural education in the late 1800s. So North Carolina State University, that's where I first learned that you can actually earn a degree in poultry science. And there were many, many such degrees at North Carolina State University, because traditionally agricultural education has been set up within those land-grant universities to train farmers and people who want to work in the food industries to become those and take the career. The other place you may know about agricultural education, I don't know if any of you in your high schools had vocational programs, but agricultural education also comes through the vocational programs in high school. You can train, but they're all career-oriented. So I was curious about this particular one because its mission was very different from other agricultural education movements. It wasn't about making farmers or training farmers. It was about increasing awareness, knowledge, and appreciation of agriculture. So I asked myself, what is that about? Now I'm going to go to a side for just a minute because you need to know something about me and my perspective on this. I'm a rhetorician. I study rhetoric, and since rhetoric is not a very common word, I thought I'd better define what I mean by rhetoric. This is Lady Rhetorica, a picture of Lady Rhetorica. And there have been many definitions since classical period. She has a sword in her hand, and she's often depicted with a lily in her mouth because the sword in her hand helps her attack and defend herself, and the lily helps her make it beautiful by using beautiful speech. And so we think of rhetoric often as a way of making language beautiful and appealing to people because we want to influence them. Plato, who didn't really like rhetoric that much, he called it the art of winning the soul by discourse or language. Aristotle called it the ability in each particular case to see the available means of persuasion. How do we persuade someone? We use rhetoric every day. How do you persuade them to go to the action film instead of the chick flick, right? How do you persuade your husband to start doing dishes more? There are many things and occasions where we, or wife, as the case may be. Francis Bacon called it the application of reason to imagination for the better moving in the will. So rhetoric is about using language to sway people, to bring them to understand your point of view and share your point of view and act on your point of view. Now, that has obvious problems. John Locke, who was a little more cynical about the whole thing, called rhetoric a powerful instrument of error and deceit. Because, what? Yes, exactly. You've heard of spin. It's spin. Many people think of rhetoric as spin. You just make something look good that in fact is not good. And there is that side of rhetoric. There's been a long discussion among rhetoricians for years and years and years about whether you have to be ethical in your use of rhetoric. Is it okay to use rhetoric for spin? Or must you be somewhat closer to the truth? But I'm going to go with a definition here that maybe is a little broader than the others. And that is the use of words by human agents to form attitudes or to induce actions in other human agents. Because then it doesn't always have to be about manipulation. It can simply be about what do we want to do? How do we get it done? We better talk about it. The only way to get anything done is to talk about it. So what does rhetoric do? And a work of rhetoric is pragmatic. It comes into existence for the sake of something beyond itself. It functions ultimately to produce action or change in the world. In short, rhetoric is a mode of altering reality, but not by the direct application of energy to objects, like pushing over a chair, but by the creation of discourse or language which changes reality through the mediation of thought and language, changing the world through words. And that's what we're going to think about rhetoric. So I wanted to look at AITC from this perspective, so I wanted to give you a little bit of a side perspective about that. My research questions then for AITC, became very curious. What's the rhetorical situation that gave rise to AITC? What factors influenced the USDA to press for agricultural literacy education? Because it was a real divergence from their historic mission. And then, what is the message? What does agriculture in the classroom want to get across to people as it reaches out to? In the course of seeking answers to these questions, I've drawn on a number of resources, existing scholarship in the history of agriculture, and also in the emerging interdisciplinary area of food studies. I've done archival research in Washington, looking back towards the origin and establishment of AITC and the communications that surrounded its establishment. I've also done 2 forms of primary source research, interviews with 7 AITC leaders, and also an examination of AITC's promotional literature and educational activities. So even though later I'm just going to show you one snippet from an agriculture in the classroom thing, I have actually looked at many. I tried to find something that was representative of the messages that are there. All right. Since we live in a city, I just want to review one of the problems that agriculture has faced in the late 20th century and on into the 21st century. And there are several structural changes that have happened to agriculture over the course of the 20th century. One is a growth in agricultural productivity. One is a trend toward fewer, larger farms, the rise of agribusiness. And finally, the one I really want to focus on, because the other two kind of lead up to it, is a decrease in farm and rural populations. How many of you know a farmer personally? Raise your hand. Okay, so that's good. You know several of you. How did you know your farmer?
We have a lot of farms in upstate.
Okay, so you had to go upstate New York. How about someone back here? Howard?
Upstate New York.
Upstate New York. Anyone? Yeah.
So way out in the burbs of the rural areas of Maryland,
Okay.
north of where I grew up in Baltimore.
Okay, Maryland, Cheryl?
I grew up in the Midwest, Illinois.
Illinois, okay.
All my relatives.
All your relatives, okay. He's a fortunate one. Not too many farms in the city, although there really is a movement for city gardening. I'm not going to talk about that today. Well, you've got your chickens for one thing, but I won't talk about that today. But you know, it's very out in the rural areas, and that's where it is. But if we look over the course of the 20th century, if we look at one thing that happened was technology made it very easy to grow food, and to grow food well and to increase yield. And this is a graph of total factor productivity showing that as the years go by, actually 1 acre gives more yield, basically is what this points out to. Another way to think of this graph is that in 1950, one farmer could make enough food to feed 15 people. In 1960, that same farmer could feed 65. In 1990, 100, and in 1997, 140 US citizens. So that's the kind of growth in productivity that happened in the late 20th century. That's partly because there were better tractors, better mechanization. There were more commercial fertilizers and chemicals. We're going to come back to that, ways to make the ground yield more, and hybrid seeds as well. Another trend that you saw in the late 20th century was a trend towards larger farms. Has anyone heard of it? Has everyone heard of agribusiness? Raise your hand if you've heard of agribusiness. Okay, they're generally the evil guys nowadays, right? Everybody talks about agribusiness and how horrible they are. And they are basically the large corporate farms that grew up towards the end of the 20th century. And you can see that how this changes in terms of the number of farms in the 20th century and the average farm size. Earl Butz once said to farmers, get big or get out. And basically that's what farming became in the late 20th century. You had a choice. You either went big and had large-scale agriculture, or you got out. And in fact, in the 1980s, where you see this dip here, the very lowest point here, was a huge farm crisis because many small family farmers had become over-leveraged with debt. And when the debt got called in, when prices of the food went down and the farm incomes went down and they could no longer sustain their debt payments, their farms got foreclosed on. And that was called the farm, that was one, there are many farm crises in US history, but that was one. So we've got that happening. But overall, the really interesting thing to see here is that the farm population is dwindling to near nothing. Today's farm population, even those of you who know someone, Sam is a very unusual person, Professor Hux is, because to have a whole family of farmers that you know is very unusual in today's society. It's, even though rural populations, the brown is rural populations, they leveled off from 1970 to 2000, you can see that the farm share of the total population goes way, way down. And in fact, today, less than 1% of the population is involved directly with agricultural production, less than 1%. Now that doesn't mean there's not more people involved with food. We've got food distributors, we've got food marketers, grocery store people. But in terms of agricultural production, less than 1%. So why does this matter from the point of view of rhetoric and the point of view of agriculture and the farms? It's a setup. It sets up a situation where you have a dwindling voice in society. Farmers who once had a huge voice in the US are now a very distinct minority. So how are they going to get their message out when there are so few of them? It's different when people had relatives that had farms and they would go visit the farm and they would go, feed the horses and do the rest. Then they would know what farming was about. But nowadays, nobody knows a farmer to go visit. So nobody really understands what it means to plow land, what it means to harvest hay, those kinds of things. And it sets up a dangerous situation for farmers' interests, right? Remember, rhetoric is about making change, because if there's not very many of you, you aren't going to be able to make very much change or have a very loud voice. So I'm moving on. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the rhetorical aspects that were going along with this at the same time. Those were structural factors in agriculture that were changing. But there were also some very rhetorical things going on during the late 20th century that were contributing to what I call erosion of the ethos or reputation. Many of us, we take a lot of time to keep our reputations high, right? When your rep suffers, you suffer, right? It's like, oh no, now, what do they think of me now? Okay, well, poor agriculture has been bedeviled on many sides, especially the large-scale agriculture. And over time, in the 20th century, there have been many attacks on agriculture. And all of you knew agribusiness was the bad guy, right? You knew that because you see it in presentations on TV and commercials. So I want to turn you back to a book that was actually Silent Spring. Has anyone read this? Raise your hand. Read that book? Okay. It's an old book. It was in 1962. They just celebrated the 50th anniversary of this book. But it was a book that was considered to have founded the environmental movement, the new environmental movement in the US. There's always been an environmental movement. And that's because it was an expose of the chemical industry, which Professor Meltius, just close your ears here. So, and its ills, and it also about agriculture. And I want to read you a little fable that this talks about. But first, I guess before I do, I want to just show you something in terms of this video. Okay. What reputation did agriculture have in the first place? Okay. See if you recognize this farm. Oh, audio's not on, unfortunately. Okay. If it were, you can probably supply the tune, right? What's going on here? Ah, you got it. I heard it in the background. E-I-E-I-O, right? I'll try to sing it on tune. A cluck, cluck here and a cluck, cluck there. It's a very old folk song. And we kind of, if you grew up in the United States, you grew up on that, singing it in the playground and singing it in your classes. Old MacDonald had a farm and all the rest. So let's get out of there for a minute. Yeah, cute little sheep, aren't they? Look how beautiful the farm looks. Isn't it pretty? Wait till you see some of the other photos I have for you. Okay, so there was that, that aspect, and I'm going back to a particular aspect in U.S. history of the okay, from the current slide. All right, there's a way to get back out here. What do I hit?
On the bottom.
On the bottom? Bottom right? That one?
No, yeah.
That one? Fit slide to current window?
To the left a little bit.
To the left a little bit?
Yes.
Slideshow? Okay.
Yes.
Ah. Now let's hope it doesn't pop us back to the beginning. Good. Okay. The Virtuous Farmer. And this is really part of U.S. history because we grew up as a nation that was a colony at first and was explored and new things, that we've been agricultural first. We started as an agrarian society. And this quote is actually from Thomas Jefferson, who was a real promoter about the virtues of farming. And he said, he actually wrote this book called Notes on the State of Virginia. And at the time, there was beginning to be more manufacturing in the country. And he really didn't like that. He didn't want to go with industry because he said, those who labor in the earth are the chosen people of God. That's the farmers, right? If ever he had a chosen people, whose breasts he has made his peculiar deposit for substantial and genuine virtue. It is the focus in which he keeps alive that sacred fire, which otherwise might escape from the face of the earth. So going back to virtue, that's who was virtuous in the new nation, the early republic. that was what they were doing. And you can see this on the side here. This Venerate the Plow is a little drawing that comes from, I'm going to get the information, have to catch up with myself here, from the Columbian magazine, which was published from 1786 to 1792. And it was kind of modeled on a British magazine. And it says, you may or may not be able to really read these words, venerate the plow. Venerate the plow. Hold it in high regard. Hold it in high esteem. He often, the word a nation of farmers is often thrown about. That's Mr. Jefferson there looking a little cadaverous today, but he wrote a letter to John Jay, who his name is on one of our CUNY schools. Cultivators of the earth are the most valuable citizens. They are the most vigorous, the most independent, the most virtuous, and they are tied to their country and wedded to its liberty and interests by the most lasting bands. So not only were farmers just plain old virtuous, they were also the best citizens. They were the best patriots. And this was the kind of grounding that our nation began in when we were an agrarian society. Then came Silent Spring. Then came some questioning of that. So I want to read to you a little fable that this book begins with that's very famous. It's called A Fable for Tomorrow. I'll read parts of it. There was once a town in the heart of America where all life seemed to live in harmony with its surroundings. The town lay in the midst of a checkerboard of prosperous farms with fields of grain and hillsides of orchards where, in spring, white clouds of bloom drifted above the green fields. In autumn, oak and maple and birch set up a blaze of color that flamed and flickered across a backdrop of pines. Then foxes barked in the hills, and deer silently crossed the fields, half hidden in the mist of fall mornings. That's the kind of rep that farming had in America. Okay. Then a strange blight crept over the area and everything began to change. Some evil spell had settled on the community. Mysterious maladies swept the flock of chickens. The cattle and sheep sickened and died. Everywhere was a shadow of death. The farmers spoke of much illness among their families. There had been several sudden and unexplained deaths, not only among adults, but even among children. On the farms, the hens brooded, but no chicks hatched. The farmers complained that they were not able to raise any pigs. The litters were small, and the young survived only a few days. The apple trees were coming into bloom, but no bees droned among the blossoms, so there was no pollination, and there would be no fruit. In the gutters, under the eaves, and between the shingles of the roofs, a white granular powder still showed a few patches. Some weeks before, it had fallen like snow upon the roofs and the lawns, the fields and the streams. No witchcraft, no enemy action had silenced the rebirth of new life in this stricken world. The people had done it themselves. And if you know anything about the Silent Spring, she really had brought out a strong, forceful argument against the use of the very things that were increasing agricultural productivity in the late 20th century: commercial fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides. Because those are all, a lot of them used many chemicals, including one called DDT that's now outlawed. And by bringing out an expose against the dangers of these chemicals for both the environment and for human beings, Rachel Carson started a whole new aspect of the environmental movement. And at the same time, guess who became a villain? Agribusiness, right? Because it was these large agricultural corporations that were using this to prepare our food, right? They were growing our carrots, spraying them with pesticides so that they would grow better and we would have more food. So we see some declines in the rep of agriculture kind of coming in. Then some of you, have any students seen this movie, Food Inc.? This is a more recent one, okay, or read the book, The Omnivore's Dilemma. You can see this cow has a little bar scan on him. This is a book by Michael Pollan, a journalist, and it was published in 2006. But again, the continued attacks on agriculture just have built since the Rachel Carson thing. Again, the claim is that industrialized agriculture degrades the quality of our environment and the safety of our food. You know this woman, right? Michelle Obama, right? She just came out with this book, American Grown: The Story of the White House Kitchen Garden and Gardens Across America. As we were eating more and more of these foods like McDonald's, French fries, and all the rest. We were becoming more and more obese. And so a lot of people hold the food industry responsible for childhood obesity, saying, well, if they had better food, they wouldn't become obese. So Michelle Obama planted a garden, an organic garden, by the way, that she has in there. But again, the arguments are against industrialized agriculture. I think I'll skip that in the interest of time. That was a film. The other argument that's come up is the inhumane treatment of animals on the farm. Maybe I'll just show you a tiny little bit of it. No, I won't. I'll leave it. You can see them on YouTube yourself, and actually they can be very upsetting. So if you go to YouTube, you can see undercover camera work in different large agribusiness farms, and you can see pigs in very small crates, kind of stuck together, chickens. You've probably seen some of these images online because the humane societies are very concerned about this. Okay. So now we get to, and I was really thrilled when I found this book, because we now have a book called A Nation of Farmers, which was Jefferson's idea and ideal. But this Nation of Farmers, you can't read the subtitle, so I put it in larger print here. How city farmers, backyard chicken enthusiasts, victory gardeners, small family farms, kids in edible schoolyards, cooks in their kitchens, and passionate eaters everywhere can overthrow our destructive industrial agriculture and give us hope for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in a changing world. You can just imagine Lady Rhetorica with her sword. Let's get rid of agriculture here. Well. And then in 2011, I was reading through the New York Times also and came across this wonderful question. Since when did agriculture become a dirty word? And it was on the third page in the front section. It was half the page was this question. I thought, that's really interesting. And it introduced an organization called the U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Alliance, who have started, because there's so much bad rep in agriculture, they've started dialogues to come back and say, no, you think that agribusiness is this way, you think it's awful and evil, but it's not really so bad. And they have dialogues now where you can talk to them about questions you might have. In fact, there's one coming up in New York on the 15th of November. But you can see some of the concerns in the seminars, right? Your toughest questions answered on antibiotics in your food. Are you worried about antibiotics in your food? Go to this presentation. Panel 3, your toughest questions answered on biotechnology, GMO in your foods. So you have the agricultural industry talking back to this demonization in many different ways, but we mostly hear the demonization. I don't think their voices are very loud yet. One of the ways that they are talking back is through agriculture in the classroom. And at this point, I want to turn briefly to agriculture in the classroom and find my place in my notes. This always happens, so here we go, just so I don't fall behind. Okay, this website, My American Farm, is founded by the American Farm Bureau Foundation for Agriculture. And the very reason that that foundation was made was to provide financial and human resources for AITC at federal, state, and local levels. Here's its mission: to build awareness, understanding, and a positive public perception of agriculture through education. Not just awareness and education like that first AIT's one. You hear that, positive perception of agriculture. Specifically, this organization wants you to start liking farming. In one of their promotional newsletters, the chairman reminds AFBFA donors. He says, food consumers may not understand what it takes to provide an abundant, nutritious food supply that too many people take for granted. And he says, farmers and ranchers often find themselves having to ask for permission to feed the world. That's what they call a defensive position, when you have to ask for permission to feed the world. So agriculture has been on the defense for quite a long time, and AITC really did come about. I've talked with the AITC leaders, I've looked at the archival materials. It did come about to fight against this negative perception. I know this in part because the USDA did not start it in their agricultural education department. They started in their public relations department. So you know it's a PR movement to begin with. It eventually became education, but it was. And you can see this wonderful and beautiful picture of My American Farm. We're back to the Virtuous Farmer, right? We got a chicken, we got a sheep, we got a cow, corn, sunflower, beautiful images of the farm. The sponsor for this site, the one who pays the bills on it, is Pioneer. So anyone, Professor Malatias, what does Pioneer do?
I think they are doing agricultural instruments.
Yes.
Tractors and that kind of things.
Yes, agricultural technology. They develop, go ahead, Cheryl, Professor.
Years ago, they did seed research on seeds, hybrid seeds, particularly corn.
Yes, and they've done a lot of the genetic manipulations. They're very responsible for the development of genetically modified organisms, which some people are concerned about in their food. Their technology. Do you see their laboratory on this picture? Do you see John Deere also is a sponsor of this site? Do you see a tractor on here? No, because this is a throwback to My American Farm. We want happy pictures, so that's the way that the website begins. And I'm going to finish up here because I know I want to leave time for questions. But I want to just briefly talk to you about the way this game is structured, then show you a little of the game. It has the children build a passport to sustainability. And both of the messages come out, and you have to do it on your own. I have one at home. Come out in the description of what this passport is for. It says, "Welcome to your My American Farm journey. Every year, America's farmers and ranchers work hard to feed, clothe, and fuel the world. They take care of animals and the natural resources we have on Earth, like land and water. In fact, most farmers and ranchers will tell you that they started working in agriculture because they love animals and the land. And they want to care for them so that students like you can enjoy these great things in the future." So there are two messages here. One is farmers and ranchers are good guys. They feed, clothe, and fuel the world. The other is farmers and ranchers are good guys because they're stewards. They take care of our animals and our natural resources. And what the student has to do, or as they use this, is they have to actually play 12 different games, and each game you get a reward stamp, and you can eventually build your passport to sustainability. And I think it's particularly apt that they use the word sustainable, because sustainable nowadays, if you see the little green logo on everything, including York College, sustainable is like the God word, right? If you're doing something sustainable, you're doing something wonderful. So this really just repeats the message on the rest of it, so I'm not going to take the time to do that. But I do want to show you briefly, very briefly, two of the games. One with the message of, they're very simple games, with the message of the farmers are taking care of you by providing food, fuel, and fiber to help you. And then the second one is called Keys to Stewardship, which actually looks at sustainability and tries to make the argument that American farming is actually, and it is in some areas, starting to take account of sustainability. So with that, I want to shift to some of the games. And you're actually lucky that the audio doesn't work, because if the audio worked, you would hear the most annoying game music that you could ever want to hear. And I'm going to start with the In My Barn, which is the feature game of the night. This is a pre-K through K program. And In My Barn, okay? Welcome to the farm. Use your math skills to help me take care of my animals. Earn points. Watch the grain build up in the silo. Fill the silo, and you will get a reward. And basically, you do best starting with, oops, let's play. I forgot to click that part. Taking care of animals is important, right? There's that taking care and stewardship thing. We're going to click on a window to begin, and we're going to do a little bit of work here to learn about My American Farm. Now, it's a basic counting game. It's a basic math game. Any of you who've watched Sesame Street have seen ones like this. But there's a farm theme. So the first thing I have to do is, not very well, put in my eggs in order here, in order to get my first, you can see why I only wanted to show you two games. Okay. These eggs are slippery things. Okay. And when you finish that, to very annoying music, congratulations, you get a fun fact, right? And my fun fact is that farmers and ranchers raise chickens around the country for eggs and meat. We're feeding you. They give chickens food and water to keep them healthy. We're stewards. We're protecting our natural resources. Okay, now I have to go through all these windows. I won't go through all of them, but because now we're counting milk, we have to count by twos. And I'll just use the other game to show you what you can get, because the other game actually shows it better. So, you know, I'm going to put my 2, 4, 6, 8, and I'm going to 10, 12, and I'm going to get another fun fact. When I finish all the games, all the little things here, I get a very special page that has my passport stamp on it. Then I can put it on my passport to sustainability and be on the way to agriculture. But I'm going to shift. I'll go through a harder game so that you can see the kind of rewards you get with that. It's called Keys to Stewardship, because I found this one. The title of it was really interesting. Now, do we have any mathematicians in here today? Any mathematicians? I hope not. Okay, because the mathematicians, you know, this is actually a Tangram puzzle. Okay. And you have to build Tangrams, and I'm very bad at it. Fortunately, it gives you a hint. I have practiced a lot in preparation for this presentation. Some people practice their presentations. I practiced my Tangram game. Did I do it? Yep, I did. Good. Okay, there I go. All right, so now I finished my first Tangram. Thank you. And I get my key and my fact. Crop rotation. What are farmers doing? They're rotating their crops in their field so that the soil becomes healthier and there are fewer pests. Less pesticide and fertilizer, the bad guys. Not so much of the bad guys. I'm going to continue this one so you can see the final thing. Okay, then we have another Tangram. There's actually a game called Tangrams if you're good at this. Watch this. See, I already lost it. I show the hint. Okay, good. That's how I learned to do them in the first place. And then I had to work hard to, uh-oh, that doesn't look right. What did I forget? You guys, that should go there, right? This should go here. Now I got a square and a triangle left. I'm almost there. There we go. And one more. All right, and ta-da! By the way, there's applause that comes in here, you should know, because it's on the audio. And then I learned about drip irrigation, which saves energy and natural resources like water. Drip irrigation is how farmers save water when they water their crops. Okay, so 2 more, and then you can, then we're done. So this one is pretty easy, I think, if I remember correctly. It's always the parallelogram that drives me crazy. Where does that fit? Aha. Once I get that, it's pretty easy to find the rest. Okay. Gets kind of fun. Okay, and one more here, and one square. Now, guess what you're going to get? Another environmental, another round of applause. This is about pasture rotation, which is rotational grazing, and livestock animals get rotated so that it saves the pasture. And my last one, you only have to do 4 to get the prize on this one. So maybe that's one of the reasons I like this game, because I didn't have to finish it all. Hint. Okay. Just in the interest of time. Okay, and then last but not least, oops, wayward piece goes there, and then I'm done. I learn about how farmers and ranchers often save wildlife food plots. They help wildlife by saving parts of their farms for wildlife to grow in. So what you're getting is a lot of, you might call it propaganda, about farming and how farmers are doing it. This is what pops up when you finish. I win something. I want a field design. I want a field using contour farming that is actually a way of making the water erosion, the soil erosion better and improving the soil erosion. And that's what you win, and you cut that little piece out, and then you build your passport to sustainability. So going back to the presentation here, I just want to end here and then have some time for questions for those of you who don't have to go to class. Okay. I learned quickly. And there are a couple of messages that I think agriculture in the classroom is spinning. You talked about spin. There is some spin here. One is that farmers are virtuous because they nourish the nation. They feed you, they clothe you, they provide fuel for you. And the other is that they take care of animals and the land in a sustainable manner. So I'm not saying that they don't. There's actually been a large movement in even industrialized agriculture to improve their methods so that they're more sustainable. But what I am saying is that this message is a form of rhetoric. It's a form of language that's intended to change people's opinions, shape people's opinions, the young people's opinions about agriculture growing up and coming up. And it is in part, I believe, a function of the number of attacks on agribusiness that they have faced in the past 50 years. So, any questions? That's, I think I said my conclusion, so I'll just go right to questions. Thank you very much for listening. Yes, Heather.
I have a question about who the farmers and the ranchers are. Because in the game, there's a lot of the farmers and ranchers are doing this and this and this, but then the statistic at the beginning said less than 1% of the population
are farmers and ranchers, right. Well, it is all farmers and ranchers. You know, that's one of the things about this game that I don't like. It does not differentiate. Anyone who's a farmer is in that group of the sustainable group. Anyone who's a rancher. So anybody who does either of those activities, according to My American Farm, is a good guy. Whether or not they get rid of their hog waste in an environmentally sustainable way. And it's this sort of sweeping generalizations about agriculture that I really do object to in this. Yes?
Cindy, I very much appreciate it. I had no idea when I was anticipating this what I was going to hear and why the heck Cindy, the rhetorician, was going to be doing this. And it's now as clear as a bell.
Thank you.
Seriously. And here's what I'd like to say. First of all, on the history of rhetoric, in the Middle Ages, rhetoric was one of the 3 liberal arts.
Yes.
And I think it's in that context that we have to think of the great significance of what you have just presented. We are living in a situation in which agriculture is not what it used to be. And that includes a lot of serious problems that affect our stomachs and everything else. Our growth, our diseases, and so on. On the other hand, rhetoric is the talk about that. And we get the talk from Rachel Carson on, on the environmentalist side and now one of the things you were pointing out with the rhetoric of the sort of agribusiness as it tries to defend itself against all these charges is that a lot of it's pretty lousy rhetoric. And that brings me back to the point about the liberal arts. People say, what is the use of the liberal arts? Well, one answer would be to produce students who will only be convinced by good arguments from agribusiness or anywhere else, right? And that what we need, we can't go back to the 18th century.
No.
Those farmers are gone.
Mm-hmm.
There's a handful of them, as you pointed out. We need agribusiness to feed all these people.
That's
but
true.
we also needed to be responsive to people's needs, and we need to be able to talk to each other and to our government in ways that make sure that happens. I think that's the great significance of this lecture.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. Other questions? Yeah. Tom?
At what point did you start to think about whether to include the organic farming movement or locavore and all of those? Because obviously that's on the other side pulling.
Yes.
And
yes.
your presentation was the corporate side trying to show we're not as evil as you think.
Right.
So maybe it's just understood, but I wonder if you want to address that because Liz and I are sitting here. We're both members of the Park Slope Food Co-op, and this would create like an explosive reaction. Can you come by our co-op and do a presentation?
And do you have chickens in your backyard?
No, we live really close to where that controversy, that block is.
Okay. I think what I'm seeing in the 21st century, and I've just really started to think about this, I do think that industrialized corporate agriculture is listening to the complaints. Okay, there's now a thing called integrated pest management, and many farmers are adopting that. It's a biological way to fight pests through using predators on pests. There are a lot of new techniques. There's a whole new field of agricultural science called agroecology, which is devoted to looking at how to do agriculture on a large scale and yet protect the environment. These things come about because you get people like the Organic Food Co-op saying, we're not going to eat your food. You know, after a while, then they wake up and say, they're not going to eat our food. We better do something different. So I see these as kind of a dialectic almost. I thought about this in the sense that first you get this horrible demonization of agriculture. They start to wake up. They start to make changes. And eventually we will come, I hope, to a reasonable food system. The big argument that the commercial agriculturists make is that you can't feed the world on backyard chickens. And I wish I knew about agricultural economists because I would like to test that hypothesis. I don't know enough about economics. Maybe I need to talk to Dean Natoko about that. Yes?
First off, you suggested but didn't go into any further detail that this propaganda is being disseminated in public schools.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also this notion that agribusiness is fighting this very widespread notion that it's evil.
Mm-hmm.
But are there data to suggest that, in fact, public opinion is so turned against agribusiness on the national scale? So those two questions are related because I want to know where are the states where this is being implemented in public schools? Is it everywhere, across the board, very evenly? And then what are the data to suggest that, you know, apart from readers of the New York Times, that there's this widespread belief that agribusiness is so bad?
You asked the question I dreaded the most because I'd hoped to have time to look at agriculture in the classroom has done some assessment of the how much they've penetrated the classrooms. There's a report that I haven't had a chance to review yet. It is pretty, you know, I went to a National Agriculture in the Classroom conference. That's where I did my interviews. And there were a number of states, but it was differential. Some states just had a little program. Utah has this huge program out of the Agricultural Extension Service. But talking to the people about why they're doing what they're doing, my first question being, you know, tell me about agriculture in the classroom. What is it about? They're almost universally their answer is, well, students really need to learn to understand agriculture because those are our policy makers of tomorrow. There's this sense that they want students to understand agriculture enough to be able to make decisions that will be favored. So I think that's a wonderful question that I don't have a good answer for right now, but it's certainly a definite follow-up. Do you have any answers for it? Do you know any of the data in terms of agribusiness?
It strikes me that there must be huge differences, you know, as you go across the country and how people respond to the notion of agribusiness, what they believe about it.
Exactly.
I think we're sitting in a little pocket of, you know, particularly vehement agribusiness feeling, but
Yeah. You just reminded me that the USDA just launched a food survey, a consumer food survey that may answer some of these questions. I just saw it come up on a listserv, so I'll take a look at that. Eric?
Cindy, I have a comment and a question. The comment is a confirmation of your own impression and this comment here about the unusual nature of active food folks in the city. I saw an incredible lecture this summer by some folks who are organized through the Soros Foundation, titled, in an organization titled Milk Not Jails. I don't know if you've heard about these people, but they are arguing for local purchase of organic products from upstate farmers to supplant an economic system that they believe is skewed toward keeping prisoners from the city when jails that are built up there and supporting a Republican hierarchy in the Senate. It's a very sophisticated argument about the relationship between food and politics. But my question is this: my sense is that there's been much longer effort to propagandize American school children in food politics. And it's probably what extent is this gendered, this rhetoric? Are they aiming these questions toward young girls, or because that was certainly the case with home economics. I mean, this was, you should buy Kraft macaroni,
Right.
because this is really such a great product to make for your family.
Certainly.
2.2 children.
Yeah, yeah, that was definitely the 1950s and 60s era, you know, used Kraft. There were whole recipes built around Velveeta, and I loved Velveeta, so I'm just like, I'm a real Velveeta fan. So yeah, it's interesting about it being gendered. There was a New York Times article that reported on some of these statistics, and at that point it said 97% of the farmers that there were white males. Okay, so that just tells you the kind of gendering there is in the farm community. And the whole home economics movement grew out of scientific farm management, and it was sort of the women's arm of that, you know, that the men were learning how to use science and technology to be better farmers, and the women were learning how to use science and technology and to be better mothers and homemakers. And so there is definitely, I believe, a gendering. We're seeing more and more women farmers. There's actually a listserv I belong to that is all women farmers. But, and you know, there is a growth in women farmers, but it still is a very gendered occupation.
By the way, I should add, that lecture that I saw in Milk Jails was given by one, I think women are becoming the activists.
That's right.
This new food movement.
Yeah, the listserv that I'm on is in Iowa, and it's women in Iowa, and they're arguing for more diversity. Iowa is big corn and soybeans. Everybody plants these monocultures of corn and soybeans, and the women are being activists on behalf of more diversified farming, which is more environmentally helpful. So, yeah, maybe the women will change the world, right? Maybe the women will do it, yeah.
But the question, the gender question is interesting in terms of going back to analyzing the rhetoric, because if you look at the messages that you're identifying, like the whole, how is this rhetoric upholding gendered values or values that have been gendered? Like the whole idea of being the providers has historically always been male identified, and then there's like the caretaking thing. I mean, I think it'd be really interesting to kind of look at the gender implications of the rhetoric itself.
Right, right, of the messages, yeah, definitely.
I mean, all the stuff about using a game and you get to own the.
That's right, you get to
own
the passport.
The passport, and what was the thing at the end?
Oh, you get a dairy, yeah, yeah, you got a piece of land there. You get all kinds of things, dairy farms.
The values of
Yeah.
competition, of
Property.
ownership, I think it's rich.
That's good. I'm just going to have to keep playing these games, I guess. I just have to get better at the Tangrams. Professor Smith? I just said your last name wrong. Cheryl. Adams. See, I only know her by her first name. So it's like, there's a Cheryl Smith at Baruch College. Go ahead.
These games are okay for pre-K, I guess. But
Yeah.
there's something very antiseptic about this. I grew up with farm families and in farm country in Illinois, as I mentioned earlier. And a lot of it is, it's hard, dirty work. And, you know, animals have to be killed. I had a pet pig where people used to die of famine. And now, because of this agriculture, population doubled, but we still export food now. I'm playing devil's advocate.
Yeah.
Here.
Oh, do, please.
Now, actually, I see what this this industry is talking about, but at the same time, more people are suffering from diseases that was unheard of in this country. Liver, kidney failures, and cancer, I mean, all these. And I mean, personally, I inspire my children, even myself, and I grow whatever I can in my backyard. So you see what I'm coming from. I do compost and etc. Because that's my, I religiously believe. And I just recently there was a research done, and it says that you know, you can feed the world without having to do this GMO.
Yes.
And by just this, you know, the traditional organic cultivation, we can feed the world. I guess there was some
Now, having said that, I have a question for you. You may choose not to answer it. Which of these two presidential candidates has a policy?
I gotta make.
I'm being naive.
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
I look at the world in a naive way. I mean,
Yes, yes. Yeah.
What should we do? I mean, this is a puzzle.
I'm gonna give you a gendered response. I'm voting for Michelle. No, but seriously, you know, I honestly, they don't talk about farm policy that much, and that's because that's only 1% of the vote, right? So I talk about farm policy. The farm bill, you know, is still, I believe, being held up in Congress because the Republicans. Here's the reason: the Republicans don't want the, I think it's the Food Stamps Act. They don't want quite so much money to given to food stamps. So that should tell you something in terms of who has more concern about feeding the world. I honestly can't speak politically. Have you looked at their positions on that?
You see, there was some farmer was talking from Midwest because of this drought he had recently, and he said that even though his crops fell, yet he made more money because of the insurance.
Yeah.
So I think it's a very complex situation. I don't understand economics or like all these hedge fund and economy and all this.
Right.
I mean, this is beyond me, but something is not right. That I can sense.
Yes. Yes. I actually, that's my biggest, I keep dreading that. I think I really do have to learn about economics because I think that's the #1 defense that agribusiness uses. You can't feed the world on that. And somehow there has to be research that begins to look at, well, can we? And if we can, what would it look like? Because otherwise you'll just get little pockets of people raising chickens in their backyard. And that's really not going to change the way that the food system operates overall. Yeah, I think Liz had one, and then Laura, and then are we running out of time? I don't know if you have time. Okay, go ahead. Liz? Yeah. No, don't take your time. Go ahead.
The game that you showed had very, sort of happy little facts and stuff like the Cheryl noted.
Yes.
How do they deal in this curriculum at all with more complex issues of GMOs, of antibiotic use? How do they treat that?
That's a very interesting question, and actually at the conference I went to a presentation by one of the original founders of AITC, and it was how to talk to activists about agriculture. And it specifically did try to address some of those larger issues by giving the farmers, this is the people who go to that conference are both Farm Bureau people, volunteers who do these presentations on agriculture, and teachers, educators mostly, and then state leaders and state leaders. And she, her whole identity as a person in AITC is to come up with critiques of activist positions. And so she did a really interesting presentation showing how you could show students that the activists, to call into question their rhetoric actually, by looking at, they were looking at who cited whom. And she basically, when you did this little game, and it was a game where you saw who cited whom, you saw that there was this little circle of activists that were all citing one another. So it became like this ingrown, the Humane Society citing Michael Pollan, who cited, Eric Schlosser, who cited this, showing that this was not as widespread of an opinion as it needed to be. And she also authored a curriculum called Fighting Misconceptions About Agriculture. So there is at the higher levels, that's a piece of this, they're pushing for higher level high school. What we saw was all elementary school. But that will begin to really take issue with some of the the negative public image and some of the supposed bad things about agriculture that are out there. That's worrisome to me. But I guess let's go. Laura was next, and then Dana, and then Jonathan.
Well, first of all, thank you, because this was fascinating, but like all interdisciplinary research, it becomes complex, and the more layers you peel off, the deeper it goes. So clearly the political implications are here. Also, perhaps some of the rhetoric that the agribusiness is developing is also in response to the fact that so much of our food is imported. So they want to not only present the farmer as someone who can sustain the environment, but it's clearly the American farmer. They want to have that positive image that they're still
Mm-hmm.
So,
Come from Chile and Peru, and I think that's really true. That it's there. I didn't touch on that at all, but it's huge. Agriculture is global now. It's not there is no such thing as the American farm, really. It's the global farm, and
but
go ahead.
that game very much, I think they wanted to get that image back, and I
Right.
love what you did with the old McDonald had a farm.
Yeah.
Because that's, how I grew up, so many of us, younger people. Many of us grew up, with that, and it's clearly embedded, in kind of the American cultural
Right.
psyche, but it's being diluted, and they want to bring it back.
Yes.
But it doesn't correspond to the reality.
Exactly. Yeah, it's bringing back something that's outdated and doesn't really exist anymore, right? As I think it was Howard was pointing that out. Yeah. Dana?
I think there's another aspect of the rhetoric, and that's the rhetoric of education. What do we mean by, education? What is educational?
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that it's kind of marketed towards this pre-KK audience,
Mm-hmm.
right? It is kind of cute. You drink the eggs and you have the numbers, and it's very game-like, but, what's the education? They make it seem as if it's counting.
Mm-hmm.
So a parent might say, oh, this is going to help my child with numbers, when in fact, if you don't already know how to count, that's not helping you to count at all.
Mm-hmm.
So there's really nothing educational about it.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing you're actually learning are these kind of, the kind of farming rhetoric stuff. So there's also the kind of implication of educating parents about what is educational for your children.
Mm-hmm.
What are you actually learning, and who's deciding that?
Mm-hmm. That's a good point, yeah, overall. The bigger picture of how we raise our students and what we want to teach them. Mm-hmm. Good. Jonathan?
A lot of interesting stuff there about pre-K and so forth. I'm wondering about on a kind of different level if you've been thinking about agriculture in the college classroom, and even more so in the college research laboratory. Because especially on land-grant campuses where they have entire schools of agriculture, and one of the big sources of funding for that kind of research are companies like Monsanto.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, there also are, there's grants from the agriculture department, but they're very scarce, they're very hard to get, and a lot of scientists find themselves sometimes in compromising positions, where it's an issue of keep the laboratory open, or stand on some kind of principle and fire all your technicians.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if you have some thoughts about agribusiness on campus.
It's an interesting. Yes, you're right. They do a lot of the funding for these organizations. So that's why these political things matter so much. We're talking about huge trends and movements overall. But I guess I'm hopeful because, first of all, I knew a lot of my colleagues at North Carolina State who were in the agri-sciences. And I think that they make sense. They're sensible. Many of the land-grant universities have started centers for sustainable agriculture, which are specifically designed to start to do research in the kinds of agriculture that is going to change our system. That makes me very hopeful, because instead of only figuring out how to make better fertilizers, they're figuring out how to do things in a more sustainable way. And I think even companies like Monsanto, they're tired of being the bad guy. I mean, I'm not saying that they've changed. They're still after profits. If you watch Food Inc., you're never going to want to buy anything from Monsanto anymore. But there's a certain amount of ways in which public pressure can change the ways corporations behave. They may still want a profit, but if the consumer says, you only are going to get a profit if you do things in a certain way, that's powerful. That's a powerful way to change things. Are there still a lot of self-interested, GMOs and things like that? Yes, but I'm hopeful that there's change, just like I'm hopeful that there's eventually going to be some shifts in the food system itself. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think. The student, and then Heather. do. Well, it takes funding, and that's a big thing that the AITC people at the conference were very worried about, and that I give them a lot of credit for. A lot of the farmers who work in the AITC want students to come out to their farms for farm experiences, or they might bring in some cattle. You know, there was a field day of farming in Nevada, where they brought in, a lot of the cattle ranchers brought in their actual cows and did sort of an in-service type of with the students. They could come and they could see the cattle, they could see the cattle trucks, although his comment was, I want them to see that cattle really do have room to move around in my truck. So, but you're right, you know, I think it's a really larger question, and that's a puzzling piece of it, which is why I brought up the structural changes, because first-hand experience is so different from the flat little screen, you know, unless you actually start engaging in some agricultural type of activities. It sounds like your school did not have anything that did that. Yeah, I know Professor Grasso's husband works for Grow New York City, and I think there is a movement within the city to start bringing in times. It's huge. Professor Fusco works on that too. We're working with that. And
there's a lot of urban gardening, and like, you know, organizations like Green Thumb, all you have to do is pick up the phone, and, you know, if you have a plot of land, they'll come out and help you build, you know, vegetable boxes, and they give you the soil and the seeds, and all you have to do is cultivate it.
When I was younger, I saw a lot of Green Thumb, but it's diminished now. They just like put buildings in there and stuff like that. But Green Thumb, I've seen it when I was younger, but now it's
not there anymore. Yeah, that's a big problem, is resources. But, you know, I think, you know, trying out a little farming yourself, you know, try to grow a little plant. You know, it can start really small in terms of really understanding how food is produced. But you're right, I do believe that in the schools there needs to be more emphasis on this. And I would say that many people want to do it, but that funding isn't available. The guy who was telling me about the cattle day was saying that the school funding was cut, so they can't do that anymore. They can't have that, and that was a big yearly event for them. So, yes, are we stopping? Right. Yeah, that's true. All the botanical gardens in the city area have really interesting agricultural programs that, if you're interested, could get you started with some of that stuff. And I think there was Professor Robinson, and then I have a couple more. And yeah.
Seasonality, because I've been thinking about the global farm and how that sort of got rid of seasons, or maybe we got rid of seasons and then agriculture became global. I'm not quite sure which direction it went in. But is there anything addressing, like in summer you get tomatoes, or is it just like you can have what you want when you want it?
You know, it's interesting. In the My American Farm, that's interesting, because in AITC, there is not an attention to seasonality. And the food activists, there is. Like the co-ops say, hey, we got collard greens because that's what's available right now. That's what we have. If you're part of community-supported agriculture. And locals, like whatever's local has to be able to be grown in your climate at your particular time. But I don't think that the agribusiness people are that interested in seasonality, although the farmers themselves are very aware of seasons. One of the biggest complaints the farmers had about the educational season was that we don't teach students about weather. Because to a farmer, weather is like, that's bread and butter. That is so important.
It's still the case, right? You still need rain.
Yes.
Crops,
yes, we do know that.
Massive farm.
Yeah.
Still needs rain to,
yeah. Yeah, but I think that the seasonality comes a little bit from the localization and regionalization movements, which say, let's stay local, let's buy what's in season. It isn't coming from My American Farm. My American Farm is everything's available all the time. There was a... oh, yes, you had a question also.
I wanted to thank you very much for My American Farm recital, because when I am from Paraguay, Mediterranean country in South America. So there we go, the farm goes by season. I grew up, my great-grandfather was a farmer too. And I would consume everything from his farm. It was a little model farm, chickens and cows and fresh milk. And believe it or not, when I first came in the United States, much, the veggies didn't taste at all. Nothing was real for me. And I said, is there a farm in here? Thank you for my American farm, because New York then is, I get everything, anything I wanted when I wanted. And I think in that it's wrong, because farmers do, they do, my grandfather used to play by the season, the weather, the sun, the raining, the moon, even the calendar of the moon, the sound. So, I wanted to thank you for the title.
Thank you, and thank you.
I think there's a lot of political issues definitely that leads into farmers to do certain ways. They're just hang up, they're tired.
Yeah. Well,
Political and education it will be great. I actually told my mother, Mom, why didn't you teach me to do cheese? Because the first thing she had to learn when she was little is to milk the cow, make cheese, make butter, and to help the mother also with the little farm she had on the side of her house. And we had a house in Paraguay where my mom actually will make a little square where she will plant some of the veggies that we can have. And we have grapefruit juice every day because we had grapefruit trees. And when I came in the United States, I was so lazy. I'll go just buy the box, the juice that is already there.
yeah, you didn't have to go.
I gained 10 pounds in a day.
Well, I want to thank you for sharing that wonderful detail about your country and your farms, because it sounds like how we really would like, most of us who are food activists, and I will say I am that way, would like our farms to be. So, and you're right, that's a concern. I think you brought up about diseases, the kinds of diseases. American Indians as well are fighting this because on the reservations, a lot of the traditional foods that they used to prepare, people aren't preparing it. It's the McDonald's, it's the, the grapefruit juice. And when you eat those highly processed foods, they do contribute to obesity. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that.
Cindy, I have one detail I want to share with folks. There used to be chickens living here on York College grounds.
Oh yeah, I saw them. That's right, that's right.
Out in the back.
By the loading deck, right? The loading dock. What happened to those chickens? Oh, no.
I thought it was a raccoon.
It was written up in Pandora's box.
But we have one in Forest Hills now.
Oh,
So
good.
The chicken lives right at the train station.
Okay, good. So there is another chicken. Okay, good. I saw another hand back here.
I don't know if you guys are aware, organic food is supplied to New York City, by farmers, directly from farmers.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're aware of Grand Army Plaza. They have a farmer, they open their cars.
Yeah.
Union Square Park.
Yep.
So it's directly delivered to New York City by these farmers. So they are encouraged to produce organic food. But
Yes.
The demand is so high that the prices are way high too compared to the other places.
That's a very good point. Do you shop there ever?
Sometimes.
Sometimes. But you're right. That is a real issue, is that the prices of the unprocessed, raw, fresh foods are much more expensive. And that actually has become a class issue, too, as to who can afford to eat this kind of food, that healthy food, as opposed to somebody who says, well, I guess I'll go for the $1 menu at McDonald's because I got $1 and it's not going to buy that $3 head of lettuce, right? So it's a huge issue in agriculture, in organic agriculture. It's another economic issue. That's why I think you need to know more about it, the economic side of this.
Well, once again, once you start to look and really think about this, it's revealing so much. And as you started out by saying, the food is basic. But I wanted to comment on the idea of the disappearance of the seasons.
Yeah.
For when we go shopping, especially for produce. Because also I remember growing up, oh, wow, we have blueberries now.
Yeah.
And you couldn't get them in the winter.
Yeah.
And it adds to the growing sense in our society and in our culture that we can have whatever we want on demand.
Yep.
And we don't have to be patient. We don't have to wait for anything. You can really explore that.
Yeah. This whole thing really touches on so many areas and issues. You can go, that's very helpful. Philosophy. Where's Professor Ruttenberg? He had to leave. Okay, I think that this, thank you. Thank you all for coming and for sharing.